I'm Mike Adams from First Response Radio. We've established the Rapid Response Radio Unit, and we believe it's life-saving information in times of disaster. You get an emergency station on the air within 72 hours of a disaster anywhere in the world. So today we're talking about strategy of how we build rapid response radio teams, the equipment that's involved, and then we practice setting up the whole radio station.
As we're really thinking and talking about preparedness here today, what is it we do now that makes us ready for disasters? What is it that we do now that allows us to clearly communicate in a two-way basis with communities affected by disasters? So what we're going to share with you is the lessons we've learned the hard way. There's a lot of sweat equity in what we're about to show you. So it's how we prepare for disaster so that when a disaster strikes, teams are on the ground and broadcasting in 72 hours. How can you even do that? So we'll share the lessons that we've learned from the hard school of Knox and the steps involved in that. The core communications tool that we use, which is called the Critical Information Matrix, the Information Matrix, which is just a way of thinking about the right information at the right time. And lastly, do you see the radio station here? We are going to set up the radio station today. It's a radio in a suitcase, a couple suitcases. So we've got a suitcase here, we've got a suitcase there, and you see an antenna in the corner. You, the participants, will set up our radio station today, hopefully illustrating that it's very easy, it's very simple. You don't have to have an engineering degree to put up a radio station in times of disaster. So just recently, we had a team deploy in the Assam floods in North India. From the decision to go, they were on the air broadcasting over shortwave in 3 days. So within 72 hours, there were messages going into the affected community in Assam. This is the point that First Response has gotten to today. We didn't start here. So let's go back to the beginning of the story. The Asian tsunami was the event and activity that changed my life, changed my work, and changed everything I do. I was a radio engineer, and now I'm a humanitarian response communications specialist. We had the idea that radio stations could be really helpful at ground zero in the middle of disaster zones, but we hadn't actually done it yet. And so when the tsunami came in 2004, we said, wow, look at the great need. We're not really ready. We don't have our kit together, but the need is so great, we're going to jump in and do the best we can, call it a learning lesson, and try to see how we can do better after that. So we worked alongside local partners in Indonesia, had a license granted from the Indonesian government, set up an emergency radio station, and ran for 3 months during the emergency, post-emergency phase of the tsunami in the early days of 2005 then. And it took us a month to get on the air. It took us a month to get our team together, to get our strategy, to get equipment together, to get into the disaster zone. We'd actually missed the emergency phase of the disaster by that point, but we arrived the best we could and learned from it. The story that you're going to hear next is from a lady who lived through the tsunami. I asked her to tell us what information did she need at the time the earthquake struck and the tsunami wave came through town. What information did she need right away? And what were the emotions that she was feeling at the time? So let's listen to Dory's story.
It was confusing. People were going around while they don't know what to do. Even they don't know where to go. Some people cry and running. It was dark because no power, no communication. All the communication line was broke. All people faced will look frightened. We don't know what to do. And what's going on? What happened? It's a disaster. We really want to know what happened. We also want to know what we have to do to survive in that situation. We know where we can find a safe place when the earthquake comes again. Or where we can find a food, water, and then how we can find a medical help. It will be very helpful if there is a radio or TV station that can give us information so we can survive better and even help other people around us.
This is right on day one. Right after hour zero on day one, they want to know some of these basic things. And people even want to know bad news. Sometimes we think we might do them a favor by not telling them all of the news, but in their minds, if we don't give them unbiased, clear facts, in their minds they will imagine things even worse than they are. Following the Pakistan quake, 2005, the earthquake was so loud, the landslides, the noise, that people thought a bomb had gone off in the mountains of Pakistan. They share a border with India. India is a nuclear-powered country. They thought it was nuclear holocaust. It's the end of the world. Well, the news is bad news. 85,000 people died in an earthquake. But no, it's not the end of the world. It's not nuclear holocaust. So people need information, even to help calm these fears. The Rapid Response Radio Unit is serving the affected community. So it's communication going into the community. It's not the news agency covering the story and taking the information out to the rest of the world. It's what do the people need in the community to rebuild their lives. And we would say that the goal here, the goal that First Response has set for ourselves, and we urge other CDAC members to accept as well, is that we should be on the air broadcasting within 72 hours of a disaster anywhere in the world. That's what the R in 3RU stands for, Rapid Response Radio. So why does it need to be rapid? Why 72 hours? We heard from Dory's story, the greatest information needs are in the early phase of the disaster. The longer you get it, the longer you wait, the longer it takes to get communication to the affected community, their information needs are going down. They've solved it another way. Someone else has come in and provided things for them. Their information need slowly tapers off. And if we miss the first phase of the disaster, as in 2004, in the Asian tsunami, we didn't arrive until the post-emergency phase, and we realized we'd missed a big opportunity to serve the affected community because they need information rapidly.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Yes.
Is that the assumption that you need to go in there because there is an information gap to fill? And in which case, why shouldn't she expect to get that from her local
Good
media?
question. There's a couple assumptions. I mean, our first founding assumption, we started working at the tsunami. All radio stations were off the air. For 2 weeks, all the pre-existing radio stations, nobody was on the air for 2 weeks. So sometimes all infrastructure is lost. Sometimes you only have what you bring in. Now, that's not always the case. So in our scenario just today, we were assuming some FM stations are on the air. In Mount Merapi, Indonesia, when the volcano exploded in Jakarta, Indonesia, there's radio stations on the air who are going on business as usual. Everyone down in the city, you turn on the radio and you wouldn't know there was any problem. And there's the couple 100,000 people who were in IDP camps who fled the volcano, and there's stations on the air, but there's no content. So sometimes it's just coming along and partnering and saying, you've got a station, you're clearly covering the area, can we help you in your messaging? We have to assume that sometimes everything is lost, but if everything isn't lost, you don't need to duplicate it, you don't need to put up competing radio stations, join up and partner up. Okay. So this goal, 72 hours, can you even be messaging and communicating into the community in that short amount of time? Well, the answer is no, it's impossible, unless you do these three things. You have to work on your messaging strategy before you need it, and that's why it's great that we've got the messaging library, and you need equipment before you need it, but the key thing, and this is where the magic happens, you have to practice. You have to get out there and practice. So let's see what these three things look like. For people to really get their heads around what kind of information do we need to provide to the affected community, we've done training for radio practitioners, but we'll also bring in NGOs and government response people into a joint workshop together. So we'll run a 5-day workshop where humanitarians learn about using radio, how I take this message and I craft it into an impactful radio message. We'll take radio people who've never really learned anything about the humanitarian community before, and in 5 days give them the in-class tools. Some of the tools that we look at, the critical information matrix that we've talked about. If you imagine a matrix here, where the different columns are the phases of a disaster, or time. Day 0, hour 0 is right here in the first acute emergency phase. While people are still dying, while rescue is happening, lives are still at risk, this very acute first phase may last a week, a couple weeks. In the Asian tsunami, this extended up to a month. It was so hard to rescue some people, provide food and water the very first time. So during this first phase, they have different shelter information needs. So if we have the categories down here, disaster news, shelter, water and sanitation, food. So the key categories, you'll recognize these as the cluster groups. The same cluster group strategy that we were talking about in messaging. People need messages from every cluster group, but in every phase of the disaster. And so let's look at the next one, Theo. If we just zoom in on these first ones, shelter. In the first week or in the first phase, people are sleeping under a coconut tree. They have no shelter. They're looking for just an emergency shelter to come to. They cram into a gymnasium somewhere. They cram into a school, but that's not, that can't last for long. And so first is, where do I go immediately? And then the post-emergency phase, camps have been established. We have tent cities, IDP camps and tent cities. How do I get a tent? Where are the tents set up? And so information about that in that next phase where it's pseudo-permanent, but it's not permanent. And then during the rehabilitation and reconstruction phase, now they're rebuilding houses. My house was destroyed. How do I qualify for a new home? Who's building new homes? Who do I apply with? How do I apply to have a home rebuilt for me since my house was destroyed? So in that one category, shelter, the shelter information, the information needs change as you go through the disaster. And even into the mitigation and preparedness phase, we're getting ready for the next disaster. Do you know where your emergency shelter is when the next disaster strikes? Where is it that you should go? So the information matrix just helps us in our mind think we need to provide information from each category, each humanitarian cluster group, and we need that during each phase. Okay? And in some disasters, different categories of information are more important. Earthquakes are different than floods. Broken limbs, water and sanitation. We have different higher priorities depending on what the disaster is. We realize that you can't buy stuff and be on a plane in 24 hours, so you need to buy equipment in advance. One suitcase is a studio, one is a transmitter, the other box is an antenna. If you add a 2-kilowatt generator, you can be self-powering. But the next thing, someone mentioned radios. We believe we need stockpiles of radios to distribute. This one is a wind-up, self-powered AM, FM, shortwave radio. Okay, there's no FM, but we can reach them with shortwave. Give away one radio, have one radio in your kits. Whether you use local radio or international radio, you have the right tool ready to distribute. From the BBC Action Media, they've got their Left in the Dark strategy here. Thanks for bringing this. This first came out in 2008, and it's republished now. And I noticed, and I put a star next to it, it said, even though we recommend stockpiling of wind-up radios for emergency and emergency distribution with non-food items, this remains essential and unfulfilled. I would agree that this is you in the humanitarian community who are involved in distribution and NFI, non-food item distribution, put radios in your distribution. Maybe not every family and maybe not every individual. Radio and information can be shared. We need to have radios to distribute. Okay? And I think the last thing, this is where the magic happens. And today you're going to do it in 15 minutes, which is practice what we've learned in the class. After we've had 5 days in the class, we will take the students out into the field and do a field trial, a field exercise of running radio like they would in a disaster scenario under as realistic conditions as we can get. This last year, we were operating on the mountain in Indonesia on Mount Merapi volcano in an IDP camp. People were still living in the IDP camps. We came and lived with them. We interviewed them. We got the village chief on the air there. We did radio, starting from scratch, set up the radio station on the air in 45 minutes, and practiced running a radio. And this is where all these relationships are solidified. This is where you find out whether you can get a radio license. You build relationships with the regulatory authorities, and all these things that are going to take too much time when the disaster strikes. We work on in an exercise 3 days, and we'll just do the 15-minute tip of the iceberg today. Okay, does that bring it up to you then, Thea?
Yeah, I think
okay. So those are the core things that we do. We believe in training before you need it, buying equipment before you need it, and doing this field exercise. And we're doing this not on an international basis. It's not an international fly-in rapid response team. We're building teams in Indonesia, in India, in the Philippines, in Japan. So we jump past the language and translation issue by establishing local teams who are ready to respond in each of these countries. I would say that we have in-country strategies. Every country deals with a different thing. The Philippines have nominated 5 frequencies. We can choose from which one is free and inform them which one we want. In India, we have to ask the local district magistrate. He sends the request up the chain. They've promised to grant and clear a frequency. Indonesia, you just check that the community radio station is free and you begin broadcasting. It's hugely varied, but what we learn is we have to explore this in every country that we intend to operate, and I would like to add this information to the country-by-country information. What's the strategy for getting a license issued quickly in case of emergency? Possible? Not possible. Let's add that to your database. Okay.
Yeah. And just to add to that, if as we're already partnering with local media groups, we can work on less and less assumptions. So, we can have an idea of what they're already doing and what they need and build up their capacity. So the more we develop it, the fewer assumptions we can work on. So I'm going to talk us through really briefly a case study, an example where a local team have deployed, and also just to unpack a bit of the kind of content that they delivered. So I want to start with the 5 tasks or roles of radio. The first one, entertain. You might think that's a bit of a weird thing to have in a disaster, but actually there's no point delivering critical information in a way that's really boring, because basically no one will listen to you. So whatever information you're delivering, it has to be entertaining. You have to get people listening, whether you're sharing stories or you're delivering life-saving information. You've really got to think about making it entertaining. The second one, inform, that's the one that pops up in all the literature because it's the most obvious. It's going back to Dory's story. She wanted key information, key facts straight away, what had happened, when had it happened, and how can she get help. Promoting social dialogue. So that one is about maybe sharing stories on a community level. So perhaps there's some conflict going on or quarrels in the camps that often happens, and it's getting local people on air and just to talk about their issues and promoting kind of positivity. And the last one, advocacy. What do local people need? Are they getting the help that they need? And putting their voices on the air and really empowering them to have a voice so that NGOs can and governments can see, oh yeah, this is what the people need. Okay, so now I'm going to just talk through what the first response local Indian team did in the 2008 Bihar floods. A really rural area, mostly farming, and radio is actually the primary source, the primary medium of communication there. There's the suitcase studio. So how did they communicate with the people? So they travelled over to Bihar, they set up the suitcase studio and the camp. What did they do? Well, they did what they were talking about earlier with the mobile phone and radio multiple strategy, gave out a local number and people were phoning in. And in the first 6 weeks of being on air, they had 1,800 calls and texts. So what kind of things were they saying? Going back to the 5 tasks of radio, I think the best thing they did was advocacy in the Bihar floods. So they had calls from people saying, things like this, we're not getting any aid because we're not under the below poverty line category, so they're missing us out, or we haven't got the water purification halogen tablets that we need. So you've got 2 producers there just fielding all these requests. What are they going to do? They're not experts. How are they going to respond? This relies on their existing networks, so they're connected. They're connected with the camp administration, they're connected with the local NGOs, and they kind of work as a middleman. They're a bridge. So you've got the people affected phoning the radio station, and then the producers connecting them up to the NGOs. Give you some examples of the 5 tasks of radio. Information, people wanted to know, these embankments are breached again, who's going to help us and how? And, the radio station doesn't have those answers, but they can try and interview a government worker, and the government worker may or may not give a good answer, but they're on a journey of trying to progress it forwards. They said that the programme was a ray of hope because their voice could be heard, and there's real power in giving people a voice, because if people have a voice, then they've got an opportunity to receive help.
Let's build a radio station. We've talked about theory, and we've talked about what we do in practice. So let's do it. I'll involve some of you in it. Higher is better, okay? This little antenna we've got in the corner, stick that on top of a 3- or 4-story building. You will cover up to 20 kilometers radius. Okay, so I just want you to unroll this and find the place where you're going to connect it on the antenna, okay? So the antenna, here, I'll just uncoil this as you go along there. The antenna has a little cable, and on the end of the little cable, so just push and twist, push together, twist, just finger tight. The other end of the cable, let's turn it around so people can see. Okay, so there's only one place that it matches up with. And now we want to connect our transmitter to the studio. There's a couple of microphone cables. Use the end that works. There's male connectors, female connectors, which one? As long as you start with a transmitter, you can't get it wrong. And then Tessa, on your end, I'm fairly confident you'll find the right place. You've found the main output left and right. People are dying. It doesn't really matter if the stereo content of our music is correctly oriented. Let's just get it on the air, shall we? Okay, so Theo plugs in power to the studio. If we don't have AC power, we're going to run our little generator. John pushes the up button on the frequency menu until it comes up. It says 90, 97, 101. Keep on going to 103.5. You push and hold it. 12, 15, 20. Keep going, 22, 24, 25 watts. Okay, the transmitter is now running at 103.5, 25 watts. So theoretically, our radio station should be on the air.
First response radio, 103.2 megahertz.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Natasha.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we'll leave this up then.
And just in one sentence, how much does all this kit cost?
15 to 20,000, and it depends on how far we're shipping it and customs and things like that into the countries, something along that range. The number of training events and flyaway responses based in London, it seems like our community and the CDAC community could really stand to have a kit based here in London. I have teams in Asia and in Africa. I don't have any equipment based here. And if that's a real need that we're identifying within the CDAC group, a kit that's London-based would be well worth investing in.